Caught in a moment, screen the call, stay in it or lose it all. I'm committed, but I don't quite know the way. Sometimes I don't wanna play. Make one decision, take a bow, find a vision, find a how. This collision, what I know and what I doubt. I'm standing at the door, unsure, but if not now, then when? If not here, then where? If not me, then who? Then who? If not me, then when? If not now, then when? If not here, then where? If not me, then who? Then who? If not me, then why is everything about me? Me, and try to write another song, it's about me. I'm so sick of singing, I'm so sick of singing about me, but I'm singing, oh, oh, oh. Summer, in the night, by the water, by the tide, I can see it, checking out and checking in. Who's gonna tell him that there's no end? If not now, then when? If not here, then where? If not me, then who? Then who? If not me, then when? If not now, then when? If not here, then where? If not me, then who? Then who? If not me, then why is everything about me? Me, try to write another song, it's about me. I'm so sick of singing, I'm so sick of singing about me, but I'm singing, oh, oh, oh.
And I am Tess Benger, and we are the co-founders of the Canadian Green Alliance.
The Canadian Green Alliance is a not-for-profit organization that is dedicated to bridging the gap between sustainability and theatre. Through the development of a comprehensive guidebook, the use of green deputies, and a social network of like-minded organizations, we aim to change the way that theatre is created in Canada, with people and planet as a priority and not an afterthought. CGA would like to humbly acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional territories of many great First Nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat.
The CGA honors the dish with one spoon principle. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent First Nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers are invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. One of its core values requires that those who use the land don't abuse the land, and that people should only take what they need to ensure that we leave behind a healthy, long-term, sustainable environment for future generations.
The CGA would also like to recognize that not only do we live and work on stolen and unceded land, but that the country of so-called Canada still has much to do towards true reconciliation. We stand firmly in support of the land back movement and Indigenous sovereignty across Turtle Island.
What a good day. What a wonderful thing you're doing here.
We need to find more formats like you're doing now to keep this going now, and also when we get back.
Everything in those comments is so empowering, so supportive, so beautiful, and that is what we do in the room every month.
This was not 100% what I expected, which is good.
People will really, really need it.
It's really important to us to use Singular Sensation, yes, as a safe gathering place, but also as a place to amplify and support and offer a safe space too.
How'd you get so good at this?
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for the second episode in the Green Panel series with the Canadian Green Alliance. My name is Jake Gao. I'm the co-founder and technical director for Lost and Gone. And before we get started, I'd love for each of these wonderful panelists to introduce themselves. So why don't we start with Matt and go clockwise from there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Pilipiak. I am currently the managing and artistic producer at Bad Hats Theatre. I'm also one of the founding members of the company. And we were actually just one of the, I think, the first official partner for the full production with the Canadian Green Alliance of our production of Alice in Wonderland, which is currently streaming until April 18th. Check it out. It's in partnership with Soul Pepper Theatre. And yeah, I use he, him pronouns, and that's me. I'll pass it off to Crystal.
Great little plug there, Matt. I'm really excited to see the show. Hi, everyone. I'm Crystal Lee. I use she, her pronouns. I am the production and technical lead at Why Not Theatre, and I also work as a resident production manager at Yes Theatre, who is also another affiliate of Canadian Green Alliance as well. Pass off to Emma.
Thanks, Crystal. My name is Emma Stenning. I'm the Executive Director at Soul Pepper Theatre. I use she, her pronouns, and was delighted to have been introduced to the Canadian Green Alliance through our friends at Bad Hats, and to be looking forward to all sorts of partnerships in the future.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to sort of having a chat with each of you and talking about this. I'm going to start off right off the bat by just sort of putting it out there, asking you each, what does producing sustainably mean to you? I think it can there's all sort of different ways to think about it. If it's just reducing your footprint or doing things sort of for the long-term goals of the country and the planet. So what does sustainable theater mean to each of you? Anyone can take it.
I'll jump in if you like, just kick things off. I think about sustainable theatre making in three ways, actually. I think there are three spheres of influence that we have as theatre companies and theatre makers. And the first for me is who we are as businesses. And the same can be said of any business in today's society. What are our responsibilities to run our businesses ethically and sustainably? Who are we as employers and the places of work, and what are the resources that our business uses? So that for me is the first sphere. It's sort of thinking about getting your own house in order. I think the second sphere is about what we put on our stages and the stories we tell, and the profound responsibility we have to influence hearts and minds. And because I think at the end of the day, that's the biggest challenge in this debate, and it's why the arts has to step forward and take a leadership role. So what are the stories that we're telling? Who are we telling them to? What is the learning and the inspiration that we can hold within our theatre spaces? And then thirdly, how do we inspire and empower the artist advocate and the artist activist even? How do we support art making that goes beyond even the catchment of our own companies, but goes out into the world and really leads change? So for me, it's getting your own house in order, telling the stories that make a difference, and empowering the artist activist.
Yeah, I think ultimately you're keeping sustainability in the forethought, right, throughout your process. And I really think that, sustainability is relatively new. I would say it's definitely a new part of my practice and in the agency that I have in a process. And ultimately, I think that's what we're trying to aim for, is how do we recreate the process, especially in this pause these days? How are we rethinking less about the product? Of course, the product is always going to be important, but how do we make it culturally sustainable? How do we make the process culturally sustainable, as well as keeping it eco-sustainable? And generally, you're starting at the very beginning. So how do we normalize that conversation at the very beginning with our budgets, with our schedules, with our people, with the consultants that we're bringing on, even with the art form? Like, what is exactly what Emma said, like, what is the storytelling here, and how do we sort of ingrain, maybe in a passive way, maybe in a more active way? But what does that mean at the very beginning?
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of my views around sustainable theater are still sort of in their infancy in a lot of ways. With Bad Hats Theater, we were very lucky. We were in a very lucky position that we went from being a very small indie company, sort of touring to breweries, to getting a large platform rather quickly. And one of the discussions that we continually had amongst ourselves is, how do we grow sustainably? How do we grow in a way that we don't rocket ahead of what we can actually take on? And how do we make sure that we grow in a way that we can support ourselves and continue to grow, and also extend our platforms to others and uplift them as well? So carrying that over into eco-sustainability, it's sort of that same way. It's making sure you're looking at all the resources around you, trying to innovate within them. What can you do? And for me, what a lot of eco-sustainability in producing has looked like right now is just inviting that conversation to the table and giving it space to think about it, to talk about it, go, oh, that's an easy switch that we can make, or oh, I don't know how to do this, let's ponder on it. But it's about that invitation to the table, to sort of think long term as to how we can shift our practices. And because we at Bad Hats are in a position where we're newer to it, we don't have years of what the rules are for us. We're able to look at what we've seen done before and say, we like this, we're going to take this. We don't like this, we're going to change this, and move forward from there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that theater is one of those art forms that's, I think, rather inherently unsustainable. The temporary nature, the sort of big grand style, there's so many different things that kind of come together for a very short period of time and then it disappears. So I think one of the challenges is trying to come up with ways to sort of fundamentally shift away from that, instead of getting into, oh, okay, well, we can replace styrofoam cups with reusable cups, and we can replace styrofoam on your sets with paper on your sets, and kind of styrofoam theme. What other major things kind of about the industry or about the art form kind of need to go back to ground zero and kind of start again and rethink it to move forward? Yeah. Go ahead, Crystal.
Yeah. I was thinking a lot about this as well, and something that came up a lot for me was this idea. I want to say it's like a cultural idea of what safety means, and I mean that in a practical sense. So if we're looking at like a flat, for instance, most of the time you're building a flat with a frame and you're gluing the frame to another piece of wood and you're stapling the crap out of it, and you can't use that piece of wood anymore. So I think the argument is often, well, it's safer this way, but that seems a little extra for safety. So how are we, creating a balance of what safety means within the context of sustainability? How do we not go above and beyond safety and actually, keep those materials useful? Or how do we change those materials altogether? I think for me, when I think of this question, the fundamentals, it's like a Venn diagram of like safety, convenience, which is often like leading to the economics of it. Like how much can you save, I guess, by buying cheaper materials? And sustainability. So where does sustainability fit in all of that by making it still functional for your budget and still safe for the length of your show? Those are things I'm thinking about now.
Yeah, I think there's a big question about touring as well that we've got to go right back to the start with, because the first tours I worked on were building massive sets in triplicate around the world. They were flying bits left, right, and center. They were shipping bits left, right, and center. And obviously this year, none of us have been touring, none of us have been traveling, and we've all read and seen the impact that's had on the planet. And I think there's going to be a huge moral question for our sector about, are we going to be putting shows on planes and flying them around the world? Are we going to really dig deeper into this digital world that we've all discovered creatively over the last year? And I get very torn about that, because I came into theatre as a touring person, and I think it's a really magical aspect of our industry that you make a show and then you share it with communities around your neighborhood, your country, the world. That is an important part of what we do, actually, is sharing stories with each other and being in real time and space with people. And I get really knotted up when I start to try and understand where we go with that, because I don't know the answer, but for me, that we need a big discussion about the future of touring and how that's going to work.
And I think there's also that, when you mentioned transportation of the sets, that's not just a problem with touring. I think, there's a lot of companies that will have a set built over in Europe because it's a little bit cheaper than having it built in North America, or they'll have it built in Asia and sent over here. And sometimes that's 10 or 12 or 15 shipping containers. And then on top of that, you have transportation of just people to your venues, and sort of just that idea of transportation. I think that there's sort of a lot of these extraneous impacts that I think we don't necessarily think about are directly related to the art that we do, the theater that we do. I recently learned that the average email has a carbon footprint equivalent of about 4 grams of CO2. You add attachments and it goes up to like 50 or 60. And you think about how many emails you send in a day and all the data that you have online and things like that. So, and then it got me thinking just about what other impacts, carbon eco impacts might there be for theater companies that they might not even be aware of, beyond sets, beyond the sort of big things that we all see and think about every day.
Yeah, I think transport is still a huge issue. I mean, and thinking about how people get to your venue. I mean, Soul Pepper is obviously a venue company, and this is something we've just started to think about, is are there ways that we can incentivize our audience to use a greener form of transit to come to the theatre? So if you arrive and can wave your cycle helmet at the bar, you get a discount on your coffee, or, are there ways that we can just play with that and have fun? Because the distillery, Soul Pepper, the Young Centre is in the distillery, and it's not the best transit links to get there at the moment. So people, there's a lot of people drive to the venue. So just starting to think about that, and what is the carbon impact of people's transit to our shows, and are there ways that we can incentivize them to use a bicycle or walk or use the TTC? So yeah, that's a big area of exploration, I think.
And I like the idea too of sort of giving people an incentive to, if you wave your bicycle helmet or you show your bus pass, that there's sort of, a way to get a bit of a discount. all these things come at a cost, whether it's a labor cost, things might take a little bit longer, skills, you might need to hire certain people that can kind of talk about different things, and then obviously financial. So, I think I'm curious, and everybody else is curious, like what are some of the big costs that are associated with becoming more sustainable, and how do you sort of reconcile that right from sort of day one in your budgets and in your time management?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I want to add another bubble to my Venn diagram that hasn't been published yet, that will be, I'm sure, that I will publish someday. I think time is a big factor. Like, definitely, if you can find more ways to spend the time planning ahead of your show, or maybe like blocking off a couple of weeks in your process to dedicate it to sustainable practice, it might actually help in the long run. I say this because Emma, when you transport, it's something that I've been dealing with in my own. At Why Not? Right now, we're looking to tour a major show across seas, and we have a really tight turnaround time. So we're kind of limited to air travel right now with a big cargo. So as the producer and I were talking, we thought, well, maybe our timeline is really short here, but what about at the end? We have nowhere else to go when it returns to Canada. So is there more time there available to us where we can actually put that on ocean freight as opposed to air freight? And that ended up like saving us $25,000. It's a great concrete example of, what this ultimate question is, like, can sustainable producing save you some green in the end? And that was a great example of that. So yeah, just taking that extra time to plan those aspects of your show. Great for reference. It takes about 30 days to return to Canada from the UK. But yeah, it was a great learning moment. So definitely time. Yeah, and with time, you can use that time to collaborate more with your designers. You can source found materials. What's going on in the community? Like, are there ways of collaborating with other shows and using those materials? Actually, I think Matt, Bad Hats, and my last show communicated a little bit about sharing our set, which I don't think was used in the end. But it was a great conversation in the community that wasn't so precious about retaining that artistic intellectual property, and instead like realizing that sustainability is a better priority in that.
And I will say that I think the sharing of resources is such a huge thing that is so many companies don't think to do. And I think, Crystal, you touched on it brilliantly, like time and convenience are such a huge thing. And with a little bit of forethought, again, I will be the first to admit I'm a lot newer to sustainable producing, but it has more so saved us money than it's cost us extra money. But what it does require is some time in advance to give it the proper thought. And the sharing of resources is so massive. And it started out for us as a financial thing. Like, we don't have the money to make this ourselves. We will ask everyone we possibly know if we can find it and mess with it and make it our version of ourselves. And, in the end, we're looking to borrow some plexiglass from the show that Crystal PM'd on. And the plexiglass didn't end up working out. And we did end up having to build our own structures. But now those structures are being rented out to George Brown Theatre School, and other companies have expressed interest. Like, we're building them with intention that they won't be single use, and that requires some forethought. But when you go into that with the mind of, okay, how can we use these afterwards? If we're going to spend this much money to build them, what else can they be used for? Can we tear them down and make it this? Can we do this? Can we do that with it? And again, time is the budget that costs that it costs. But as far as like the bottom line, it has only, in my experience, sort of saved us money, and quite substantial amounts.
I think there's a sort of city-wide or community-wide project that builds on that we just all need to commit to doing together, which is figuring out storage. Out storage and recycle. And that sounds so boring, but it would be such a breakthrough if there was unified storage of sets and items and materials for the city, or for however we define this community. And then together we staff it so that it's properly catalogued, it's properly available. Because one of the reasons why Soulpepper has this fabulous store, and it's well maintained and brilliantly cared for by our production staff, but we haven't yet made the step to say, how do we make this properly available and usable and maintainable to the community at large, so that actually when someone is starting to do a show, you're not necessarily buying new all the time, but you've got a very easy, accessible way of understanding what already exists in our community and what we can share. Because I'm convinced that part of the reason why we buy new so often is because it's just the easiest thing to do. And more,
Totally.
yeah, and so actually we've got to make sharing and recycling easier than buying new, because there's already a huge incentive, which is that it's cheaper. So, you know, if it was more convenient as well, I think it would be a win-win. So yeah, I'm really up for a conversation about shared storage, shared management, costumes and set pieces. I think it would be a big breakthrough.
That is so idealistic to me. Like if there was like a cataloged resource list of all the different things that you could get. And for companies too, like, sure, you can lend it out if it's already made, like you don't need to make money off of it. But if you're really strapped, it can be a revenue stream. You can rent these things out. Like we've been happy to rent. I mean, it's better if we can borrow. We always prefer that, but we're willing to rent the thing if it's still going to be cheaper than building it, which it often is. And especially, you know, if you're going to rent it or even buy it off of them to change it into something new, that's still going to save money in the long run and would be so beneficial, not only to, I think, other professional theater companies in the city, but there are so many indie theater artists who are so strapped to find these resources, who are working on like literal shoestring budgets. And this stuff is sitting in someone's warehouse somewhere, just kind of, you know, like we were desperately looking for a chalkboard for Alice in Wonderland. And it just wasn't in the budget to buy the kind that we wanted. And again, it was just asking around a million times. And it was like, you know, a theater practitioner friend who had it like in a storage unit in an apartment building, like in Scarborough or in Ajax. And we like drove out there and got it, but it was just sitting there. And we were, you know, getting to the point where we're like, we're going to have to buy this like, you know, $300 chalkboard. And we just, you know, found it in a storage unit. So it's about, gathering those resources together, which is a big initiative. And it would take, you know, not a small amount of work to start it, but once it was there, it would be so massive to so many theater practitioners across the city.
Yeah. I'll shout out to already existing, I think, community development resources. One of them being Production Resources Toronto, which lots of people know about. It's where you go on Facebook when you're like, who has this random thing? Who can tell us? And generally, it's really beautiful to see that community support, because often, like Matt's saying, it's just sitting in someone's garage, not being used, and it can actually go to the indie sector. And what's really lovely about Toronto theater culture is that everyone has been at some point in the indie sector. Everyone's sort of sat in the shit of that moment. So like they're willing to kind of give those resources out in kind or at a very low price, which is really beautiful. So if we can continue that sort of mentality, I think we're onto something big. The other thing is Ready, Set, Recycle. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It is a large storage. I actually haven't used it, so take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt and maybe do your own research. But they are a large warehouse as well. And they, I believe, auction off things, sell things, buy things. But with enough planning and forethought, again, in your process, you can, you know, arrange to bring your stuff there and like create your own account and sell things online. So that I've heard in the industry has been a really big help, keeping that sustainable mindset. But yeah, I really hear what you guys are saying. Like, it would be amazing if not only we could have a big shared like storage unit that just had a bunch of flats and risers that could be reused all the time, but not only that, I was reading into Minnesota randomly. Minnesota's like theater sustainability model, and they actually have like a shared events calendar so that you, as a production manager or a producer or the person in the truck going to find things, actually see when shows are closing and familiar, like on their own terms, with what the show has to offer, and can actually go and time everything in accordance with that. So it would be really cool to kind of see some sort of online platform like that.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, there's so many good points that are being brought up, but I think one of the big ones is that in order to do this, whether it's sort of a shared location that everybody can pull from, or if it's, you know, within your own company going out and finding things secondhand or to borrow, whatever, that there's a lot of time involved in that. And some companies can afford that time because they have a lot of people to sort of spread around and do things. But if you're a production manager, or if you're a props builder that has, 150 different things that they need to get together for this production, how would you go about getting some of those things? I mean, where do you even start? Like we were doing a production once, and we had this wonderful person working with us who just was so savvy on buns and on Kijiji and and spent all of her time sort of going through all of these different ways to get these things. But you kind of have to just start by throwing everything out there. But it takes somebody who sort of knows that world and who can kind of find those deals and make those connections with people, because a lot of it is that sort of connection with somebody, right? You kind of need to know somebody who has a thing to be able to get that from there. So I guess what I'm sort of wondering, I'd like to talk about is like, is that sort of like, who can do that? Who can do that job? Is that another props person? Is that another, production manager or a PA? Like, is that how do we build in that time, and how do we find that person to be able to kind of do that role? Because it's new.
Mm-hmm. And it might come down to, a producer on the project, like someone who is committed to that. I think the idea of like a shared production calendar is really cool as well, because loadouts are their hard deadline, and things got to get out of there, because a lot of times, especially for, theater companies that have seasons, there's another show going in maybe the next day. So the loadout, it's like everything needs to go. And the amount of times, prior to my work at Bad Hats, I was like the king of working all the box offices in the city. I worked at a bunch of different box offices, but on loadout day, theaters across the city, you see the big bins get rolled in, and shit just gets dumped in there because it's got to go. And it doesn't, the element of time, as Crystal said, is so pressing that, if you could have a producer who's like, loadout day's coming, these are the things we're getting rid of, who wants them or whatever, to itemize that list so that it's not going into that dumpster bin that gets rolled in on loadout day, that there is a way to continue its life or extend it further. I think that that's a really interesting idea, but I feel like PM's jobs are often already at capacity, and that's, everyone's jobs are at capacity so often in the theater, but it might mean making space from a producing standpoint to say, can I get an itemized list of what you think is going to get tossed, and putting that out there for other people? Again, it's the forethought.
And having a place that's available to put that list out there, I think is crucial.
I think it's also about sort of fundamental cultural change as well. Because I think ultimately a lot of, we can't be in a place where, which I think is sort of where we are right now, we can't be in a place where we are battling to inject sustainable practice into existing models of work. I think we have to be saying, we're talking about shifting how we work so that the end product is that we're more sustainable. So for example, maybe we should be adding 5 days to every get out so that sets can be dismantled in particular ways to make sure. I'm not a production manager, but I'm sure there is a difference between rushing to de-rig a set which is about to be skipped versus lovingly taking it down in a way that those distinct aspects can be recycled and reused in another production. One clearly takes more time and money and personnel to effect properly. And then ultimately it comes back to the headline decision-making of the organization. Are you going to invest those resources? Are you going to make that time available? And that is really, really, really hard. But that is what we're saying. That is the change we are having to make. And I think it does go right back to not expecting somebody to do magic in an already overstretched position, but saying we're going to shift the parameters of this work so that the end product is that our sector becomes more sustainable.
I have so much to say about this.
Go for it. That's great.
Yeah, it's so true. Like, we're all stretched so thin. And, I've been, in preparation for this panel, I was also asking some other colleagues and mentors in the industry, like, what do you do? Do you as a production manager or a technical director need to take on that accountability to make sure that your show is sustainable? And they were like, well, that doesn't seem sustainable, does it? Like, I can't be the one who's like the head of saving the world. That's like a lot of pressure on top of everything else, and on top of the time constraints and the budget constraints as well. So, maybe there's something to be said about offloading that or redistributing that role to perhaps an assistant or someone, or like an assistant producer, or maybe that's actually senior management. Maybe there's a policy that's embedded. Maybe there's a head of like all the other heads of departments. Maybe there is a head of green theater. So yeah, I mean, those are maybe, again, it's a privilege thing. You need to have money to pay this person to do it, but you should either redistribute it so that it's everyone's responsibility and part of the overall policy, or give it to one person so that they can kind of maintain the goals of what that practice needs to be. I think more to say, but I'll leave it for later.
I think too, it's important to recognize that it's a shift. It's not going to happen overnight. There are going to be times that we come across barriers that we're like, I don't know how to work around this one at this time. And Crystal, you're saying the set had to get there in time, and so you have to fly it out there. But what you can do is think about it coming back, and that's a small change, but it is a change. And the more and more we invite that to the table and talk about it and challenge each other to keep innovating within that and to do better and try better and acknowledge, oh, we kind of failed here, and move forward, admit what we don't know, admit where we got it wrong. I think that long term we will see that shift. I think it's important not to like immediately think that everything has to change overnight. It'd be great if it could, but it just won't, and also I think people can get scared away from it because they're like, well, I don't know how I'm going to do this. Well, I can't print scripts now. I need a script in my hand. It's like, it's not. There are things that are necessary for the job, and it's important that we acknowledge those things, but it's also important to question what we think is necessary. Is there another way to do it? And have that conversation. And that's going to lead to, I think, a sustainable change long term of sustainable producing.
How many times can we say sustainability?
A few more.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like everything, what's your 5-year plan for making green theater become normalized in your organization? Is it phasing out batteries so that they're rechargeable batteries? Is it making sure that you're using steel structures because those are recyclable? Is it, you're in a venue, like, is it buying a wood chipper? So if you are going to use bad materials, maybe you can at least get rid of it sustainably. So I think, the phasing and the transition is a really good way to put it, Matt.
Yeah, and I really agree with what Matt was saying, that you have to start with the small steps that inspire change and inspire confidence in change. And that's how we started our project at Soul Pepper, that we asked a very simple question, and this is 2.5 years ago now, which was just in a full staff working session. We just said, how can we use less paper? And obviously that's not the be all and end all. It's one simple aspect of trying to become more sustainable. But what it did was it highlighted that a huge number of our staff were really, really passionate about sustainability because they jumped right into the conversation with a lot of energy. They then founded our working group, the Green Peppers. Big shout out to the Green Peppers. It was the team at Soul Pepper who are working on sustainability. And from there, just investing in people's passions for what could make our company more sustainable has been incredibly rewarding. So a subgroup started gardening for Soul Pepper. So there's gardening in our courtyard. There's also a garden on our roof now that people don't get to see, but it's where we grow herbs that will ultimately be used in our cafe. So when you come back to Soul Pepper and you have a mint tea, the mint will be grown on the roof of the Young Centre. We had other people that got really excited about the idea of urban bees. So we now have a beehive at Soul Pepper. We all had Soul Pepper honey in our holiday gift this year. And so actually there's been a whole load of little projects that have spurred off from people's passions about sustainability. But what ultimately that's doing is it's embedding the commitment to sustainability within the corporate culture. And whether you're connected to the gardening team or you're just getting your little pot of honey, you're somehow, the imagination of the company is switching into a mode of sustainability. So when we do come to the tougher questions, which we're getting to, I mean, I'm not saying everything is fixed at Soul Pepper, we're really right at the beginning of this. But my hope is that when we as a company come to ask some of the more challenging questions, we're doing so at a point when everyone is already really enthused about the positivity of becoming a more sustainable company. So yeah, I'm really learning that investing in people's enthusiasm and just taking successive small steps can really start to build to something meaningful.
That's excellent. I think, one of the big challenges that I think is prevalent in a lot of larger organizations is sort of like, how do you get people on board? How do you get people to be passionate about sustainability when it comes to actually doing it? I think most people would agree that it's important and that we should be doing something. But how do you really get that buy-in, and how do you make it a priority for the company, because I think until it becomes a priority, it's always going to be sort of the last thing at the bottom of the list. Well, if we have time for it, if we can get to it, we'll make the production a little bit more sustainable, or we'll make the company a little bit more sustainable.
And I think, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Matt.
I was gonna say, I think like on that note, it's again about inviting, your staff, your artists in your room to participate in that dialogue. And, we were very lucky that we had Tess, who's one of the co-founders, in our show. So when we partnered with Tess, and the Canadian Green Alliance, on the first day, we made, space, only 5 minutes, 8 minutes at the beginning of the day for Tess to talk a little bit about it and what we were going to try and do. And, in COVID, of course, there were certain things we could do and certain things we couldn't. But what it did is it led to a shift in thought and people going, oh, does this go, Tess, sorry, does this go in the recycling, or is this compost? Is this that? But it's like there was an invitation to ask those questions that you maybe wouldn't have asked before. And, to think about, oh, this person's bringing in a reusable cup and I have this single waste coffee cup. And those are, of course, all small little things. But to get people on board, it creates a sense of togetherness. It creates like an objective, something that we're all working towards together, an invitation to ask questions, an invitation to fail. And I think, again, inviting everyone to that conversation, the more minds, the better. The more people who can think outside the box, the more, like the Green Pepper Initiative is so cool, because it starts with, the want to do this, but then many people together bringing all of their thought and their mind power towards doing it, because it shouldn't be a one-person job. It should be a communal thing.
Mm-hmm. We've been talking a lot about sort of how we can go out there and do things with our sets or do things with our props to be a little bit more sustainable. But I have to think a little bit about the resources that we already have, particularly those who have storage facilities that are full of props or full of sets, or who own their theaters, or at least have a long-term lease on their theaters. There are a number of companies whose facilities, because of the nature of their seasons, sit empty for so much of the year. So just thinking about that as an example, like what kind of resources do we already have that we could just make better use of, and think sustainable, not in the sense of replacing something, but in terms of taking a look at what we have and how can we use it better.
Well, during the shutdown, Why Not doesn't have a venue, but we do have an office space. It's a really large 2-floor, like lofty kind of space in Parkdale. And we've actually been donating that space to the Encampment Services Network throughout the winter, just because they needed space to like house a lot of their liquids and food, perishable items, in a space that wouldn't freeze over the winter. So that's one way we've been kind of utilizing our space, because it is sitting empty. We're all working from home. We might as well give that to someone who will use it. But on top of that, we recently got a grant, which is really awesome, to purchase new equipment. And now that has fallen on my plate as the technical lead to figure out like what kind of new equipment a venue-less company should own. And a big aspect, I guess, in my thinking has been, how do I share these resources as well? I'm going to be part of a venue-less company, like I'm not going to need all this inventory all the time. And when I'm not using it, is there a way I can share that or cost share it with other companies who have equipment as well? I think Cahoots is also another great company that is venue-less. They have, a small rehearsal space, and they also have lots of inventory. So, just kind of sharing, using the network to share these things as opposed to like larger, beyond local places to purchase things or to things could be its own sustainable way.
I do think that one of the silver linings, in a way, of this awful year we've had is that we are much better networked as a sector in the city than we ever have been before. Maybe I feel that because I'm still relatively new to Canada, but certainly, I share a call with the EDs of a number of other venues in the city every week. And of course, we've been through such pain and confusion and complexity together over the last year that we're now incredibly tightly networked, and there's a real bond of trust between us. And I think that does open the door to a new kind of collaboration. And it's on a separate issue, but for example, we're at the moment recruiting a shared HR role because all of us recognize the need for real human resources leadership in our organizations. None of us could afford to create that job in and of ourselves. So 8 of us have got together to design and create a role that will work collaboratively across all 8 organizations. And that's quite a sort of pilot study. It's a pioneering step for us. But I could imagine, if it works, and of course we'll make it work, that actually having a sustainability officer that's shared between a number of venues, that could be really wonderful as well, because we are struggling to find the resources to properly invest in these things, but we are in a much better place to share and to work together in new and exciting ways. So I'm really hopeful that could lead to something.
I think there's something a little bit different when it comes to a company that's relatively small. Matt, you mentioned that you guys are just starting off, and so have been able to sort of include sustainability kind of right from the get-go. But I'm wondering, for a larger company, you can talk a little bit about Soul Pepper, and you guys have made a lot of strides sort of in moving towards being more sustainable. But what do you think the different challenges are between a small company who's sort of able to pick up certain things from around the city and find things through different connections and people versus a company that has 15 or 20 shows in a season or in a year on a larger stage, or they have just kind of more space to fill? And so how that's different, and also, do you have a different responsibility as a larger company to do that?
I think I think we have a particular responsibility about our building, and that's a building that we share with George Brown College. But making that building, our ambition, our dream is to make that a real example of a sustainable public building, and that's going to require significant investment. And we are in the process of raising money and securing grants to help us do that. But just transitioning the spaces to LED lighting, that's a really important step, and it costs a lot of money, and it's going to take time for us to do that, but it has to be in the work plan. And looking at the heating, the infrastructure, all of that has to be examined, because I think anyone with a public building has a responsibility to make sure that they are evolving it towards a place of best performance. And then I think for us, it's actually about, in terms of our productions, it's about really figuring out how to embed values of sustainability and sustainable practice into with directors, with writers, with people in a workshop, so that it's right there at the very beginning. And actually, you don't want to, every design, and in fact, we're doing some really interesting work with the ABC at the moment, the Association of Designers of Canada, that is thinking about how right at the get-go, designers are championing sustainable practice. How do we then take that instinct into our production team so that that's actually a collaborative process? How do we make directors really excited about sustainable practice, so that actually, again, it's hearts and minds. You've got to bring people with the right approach, and then we respond as an organization. I'm not saying any of that's easy, but that's what
Yeah, I think there's something really important about being able to institute the change, or institute the or sort of implement the practice as early as you can in the process. Sort of as far down that length of chain as you can, because I think you'll have a much bigger impact if right at the beginning of that pyramid you can sort of take a big chunk out of your impact, so that by the time you get to the top, there's every change that you make is minute compared to everything that you can sort of do at the beginning compound. One of the few things that we do is we have a sort of our budgeting document that we use to create, when we're building our sets, in terms of what materials we're going to use when we're doing our build lists and things like that. And built into that spreadsheet, there's a sustainability score. So there's an organization a number of years ago who went out and looked at all the different materials that theater companies use when they're building sets, glues and woods and styrofoams and things, and assigned it a sustainability score based on the environmental impacts of it, where it came from, sort of how well it's disposed. And then when you're sort of going in and looking at how you can build your sets, it sort of takes into account all of those different scores. And at the end of the day, it just sort of gives you a really good picture of how impactful, and that's a very specific material thing, but how impactful your show is going to be. And just with a few quick substitutions, you can go, oh, actually, maybe if I don't use that, I can do this. And so right from the beginning, you're not trying to find out, way down the road, how do I limit this one little thing by putting, 10 less staples in it, but you've completely eliminated the really bad things right off the beginning. So you're already sort of that much further ahead. So I'm wondering if there's anything that you guys do sort of in your own practices that's sort of kind of right from the beginning, building that kind of culture of trying to be more eco-friendly or more kind of sustainable in your practices.
I think for us at Bad Hats, we have the benefit of eco-sustainability kind of naturally matches our aesthetic style of theater. We believe in like minimalist, imaginative, like a solid group of incredible like actors working together to tell the story with as little as possible. So very early on, we figure out sort of the sandbox we want to play in, and we pick a few like essential things that we're like, okay, we're going to put these in our world and nothing else. And in the room, if someone's like, can I get this thing to do this? It's like, is it in the sandbox? No, then work with what you have. And that's, luckily lent itself very well to that eco sort of producing but it does, if we were doing big sort of like kitchen sink dramas with realistic sets, and like we've never built a flat in our lives at Bad Hats, and I don't see it in the future for us anytime soon, but that's been beneficial for us, is that, like Peter Pan, our production Peter Pan is like, we had a trunk and a sheet, and we've gone through 3 trunks in our many years or maybe 4 trunks, because we would buy like an older trunk, restore it a little bit, do it for a run, and it would get destroyed, and that would be the end of its life. But we had the same sheet for forever. We had just a few minimal things that we said, these are what we're going to use. This is the aesthetic of our show, and let's see what we can do. And when we come up with a challenge, innovate within it. How do we make this work? How do we make this work before adding anything else in? So that's how we've sort of been able to do it. But again, it benefits us because it's part of our style. It's sort of like our signature thing. So we're lucky in that aspect.
One thing that I like to advocate for, but I haven't actually had too much opportunity to start doing this myself, is actually just adding a bit of a line for sustainability. It's becoming more and more normalized, which is really great. Sometimes I enter the process for a show and see it already there, and that's really great. But generally, I try to ask producers, maybe if you just add a 5% of your total production budget for green, eco, whatever, like you don't even necessarily need to know what that means right now, but just to know that in my process, if I'm looking at materials with the designer of, I know I have a bit of leeway there that I can play with if I want to opt for a more sustainable material. So that's like one really practical, easy thing that you can sort of throw in at the very least. And then I also really love, I love being a production manager, guys. And part of that is just collaborating with all the designers, because I'm very uncomfortable with being the creative person. I think my creativity comes with facilitating and making sure people have all the information and are talking. And I love those moments where you put 2 designers in a room and they both have a problem. One really wants to, for example, outdoor theater, one wants to decorate the wall with, some sort of greenery that matches the aesthetic of the show, because that has always been part of the artistic vision. And then the sound designer being like, oh, that wall is really reflective. I need to have some sort of sound bounce. And then here, we come to a conclusion that maybe we should just add some greenery there, some ivy, a community garden. Is there a way we can utilize that wall so that it actually helps give texture to the sound designer and also completes the vision of what the designer was looking for?
Great. There's a couple more questions I want to ask before we get to some of the audience questions. First one would be, what advice would you have, or what would you say to somebody who is maybe not a decision maker in a company, but feels like their company isn't doing enough to be sustainable? What can they do to sort of bring an idea forward, or what suggestions do you have for things that they could say, or realistic scenarios for them to bring forward?
I would just say, this is certainly the practice we try and instill at Soul Pepper, but just try and find a way of raising the idea, whether it's at a company meeting or with your line manager. And if you can bring an example of how that's working successfully somewhere else, I think that can be really encouraging. And there's 3 people here you can reach out to. There's a lot of work going on. Connect with the CGA. PACT has got a green committee now. There's a lot of work going on across the sector where people are all trying to collaborate and work on making this kind of transition happen. So I would say, speak up in the hope that your idea is heard and acted upon. And if that seems problematic, then I think there's a lot of places you can go to for support for people that might be able to help you find a way of raising that idea in a really positive and constructive fashion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, like, from a leadership perspective, I think it's really important to leave channels of communication open for any sort of employee to bring forth an initiative that is important to them, whether that's sustainability, whether that's something else. I think that that's something, as a manager and leader at Bad Hats, and I've seen been really successful. Where, like, if you have thoughts, if you have wants, come to us. We're open. Like, let's talk about it. And when we hired Tess, and we're like, oh, Tess is the co-founder of the Canadian Green Alliance. We should talk to them about doing this. Like, this is something important to her. So I would just encourage that, if it's important to you, whether you're an artist who's getting hired by a theater, just to say, like, hey, do you have any sustainable practices? Is it something you're interested in having a conversation about? The Canadian Green Alliance offers really great resources, or I have some cool thoughts about this. And it's not about, like, I think that there might be, like, a fear of, like, overstepping, but I think that it's, I would hope that most theaters would be receptive to saying, just to that question, to open that communication. And if not, then they're not really great producers, in my opinion. I don't know.
Yeah, change is hard. And sometimes, especially maybe in larger institutions where there might be a lot of politics or a lot of, streams that you have to go through in order to actually enact some sort of change. But I was reading this, I talk about this anecdote a lot because when I read it, I was like, wow, you really do have to, like, show people what the change can be in order for them to buy into it. Anyway, this book called Switch, What to Do When Change is Hard. The foreword is about this organization that had multiple departments, and all departments were using different plastic gloves. And so it took, one intern to collect all of the gloves from each department, have the cost actually on those boxes, and then put them on a conference table to say, look at all the cost discrepancies. Like, you as an organization are paying so much. Like, we could just pay $5 and standardize the whole thing. So I guess maybe that's a challenge. It's something that I, look for in my own practice. But how can you actually showcase what those changes can be through your own perspective? Because often, senior management or even like a production manager can't see everything. So if you don't actually have a lot of agency to make those changes, what can you see within your own purview that you can bring to someone who does have that leadership?
I think, and I wanted to kind of jumping off of that point about, like, kind of showing what you can do, or showing what sort of sustainability can mean for a company, or what it can sort of provide for. Have any of you ever put into, the byline of a program, or when talking about the set of a show, or in a director's note or anything like that, anything about either the sustainability of the company or about the production in itself, just to sort of bring some awareness to the public, to the audience, like, hey, we're trying to do something a little bit different here?
It's a really great idea. I haven't done that, but I'm like, oh,
yes. Okay. Yeah, we have some Green Peppers messaging around the Young Centre, and we certainly as part of our sort of effort to try and reduce paper usage, we were offering programs downloadable on QR codes in the lobby, and lots of people are doing that now. And we were sharing some statistics about the wastage in programs. We have signs up in our washrooms about how to use one paper towel to dry your hands. 6, and there's a great little YouTube video about how to use the paper towel to fully dry your hands and things. So we try to, and we're making changes in our cafe about the kind of water that we offer and packaging and things. So we are slowly filtering it through. And we were obviously planning to dial it all up last year, but we haven't been able to have anyone back in our theatre last year. So it's harder. But I do think there's a real place for public messaging. And ultimately, that's the aspect where theatres will have most impact, I think, is changing the hearts and minds of people as consumers and as, you know, managers of their own homes and their own lives as well. So we've got to be forthright, I think, in our communication and the stories we're telling.
Definitely. And I think there's a benefit externally and internally as well, right? If you as a company are coming clean about like what your organization means sustainably, then all of your designers who come in, all of your, you know, shows that you're presenting coming in will know exactly what your mandate is and can, you know, alter whatever they need to do to fulfill that.
And it becomes sort of recognize the fact that you're going to step into that place and this is the attitude that you're going to have, and it makes it a lot easier for you as an organization or as a producer to sort of encourage that or instill it, because it's sort of there's that base understanding kind of already in there. One thing that I'd like to know, or what would be a good sort of point to leave on, is like, what's one thing or maybe one or two little really easy things that people or companies can do sort of right now or whenever they get back into their theaters to really help with being more sustainable?
I'll answer. Yeah. So this can be maybe a little bit difficult depending on generations or like how you were brought up in theater. But I think ultimately accepting that times are changing and that you have to adapt in some way in order to make the change realized. My dog is freaking out right now. So an example of that is like LED lighting. And I am not a lighting designer, but I do know some lighting designers who are precious about using conventional lights as opposed to, or like halogen lights as opposed to LED lights, because the spectrum is slightly different or it seems warmer. And that totally is the case. I absolutely agree. But are there ways of, releasing that a little bit so that you're not rigid in how you're designing and you're a little bit more accepting to other new forms that are more sustainable?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think for me, there's two things really. Firstly, it's talk to your colleagues and your teammates or your staff or whatever point you interact with the organization. There will be like-minded people who are equally or more passionate about this than you are. So collaborate, make a team, make a working team, invest that energy and just begin, just release that commitment within your own organization. So get the conversation going within your staff, and whatever the entry point is, enter, and it will lead to more work. And I think concurrently, you have to have the conversation with your board. You have to build it into the one of Soul Pepper's 9 strategic objectives is to become a more sustainable organization. And that's something that is right there in our strategic plan. It is endorsed by our board. And ultimately, that's the conversation which is saying this is the best. It's inevitable, but it's also, because it's inevitable, the best business strategy for us is to be on the front foot, is to be there first, is to be there. This will become law, the kind of practice we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Everyone will have to do it. There's not a choice here. The only choice is how quickly you transition. Yeah. And so that conversation has to happen with your board. And again, you will reveal true passions from among your board members and people who will suddenly go, now I am committed for another 3 years, and now I am going to double my gift to the company. And because I do feel like this somehow often is it's a secret passion of a lot of theatre makers. And the minute you go, you can bring this to the workplace. There is place for you to bring this energy, that it can be really, really uplifting and inspiring.
Yeah, I echo that 100%. I think the bare minimum and the easiest thing that everyone can do, especially right now in a time of pause, is to just open the room for conversation. If it's not important to you, listen to the people who it is important to. This is an inevitability. Change is coming. There is a shift towards this. So if you're not having that conversation already, you're behind. So the bare minimum you can do is like open your ears to listen to people who care about it, because there are a lot of people who care about it. The Canadian Green Alliance has amazing resources. Like if you don't know where to start, they have free guides to help you start. It's so simple to just invite, and then to remember that small change is still change. If you move from your disposable coffee cups to a reusable mug every day, yeah, it's small on a scale, but it's a shift in thought, and it's going to lead to more and more shifts in thoughts down the road. Small changes change, large changes change. Having the conversation is the most important start because it is a start.
And I wanted to add, Matt, just because you reminded me, like, how can you make those changes at home too? Like, how do you as a person see sustainability in your own home life? And more often than not, I think it just becomes like naturally ingrained in like your own daily practice that you see that reflection in how you see things at work. So I think, there's a lot to it's very easy to start that at home and then
And there's a sense of community with it. Like, it's cool to see multiple people engaging in a thing together, working towards something together. It holds other people accountable. It uplifts other people. During Alice, we did some like catered lunches, and I would bring my lunch the rest of the days of the week and bring my own utensils. And the day we did catered lunches, I took the plastic utensils, and I'm like, oh, I could just be bringing my utensils. And it took me seeing Tess bringing her own utensils, saying, no, I'm not going to take the plastic utensils, to go, right, this is a small thing, but I don't need this. And it, you challenge each other, you hold each other accountable. That sense of community is a huge part of it.
Yeah, excellent. I think now we should, we'll open it up to some of the audience questions. There's some pretty good ones coming in here, so I'm looking forward to getting these going. So the first one, I have a question for the speakers. What are you trying to sustain? If you're using the word sustainable, which we are. So does anybody want to take that one right off the bat?
Life on Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ultimately, and like, how do we reduce your carbon footprint? Because I think, when we think of carbon footprint, we don't see it in art form. We think of like the arts as being very innocent, and there's a lot of accountability that still needs to be taken in our own practice.
Yeah, and I think, on a fundamental level, that's exactly what it is. It's about like the waste that we're outpouring, but also sustainable. And like, I want the art to be sustainable. I want our work to be sustainable. Are we creating in a way that is long-term sustainable financially for us, for the community, for the people we want to serve? Like, what are all of those things? So it's also about sustainability of the company, which I think is tied to so many of these things as well.
Yeah, like Emma mentioned, it's going to happen sooner or later, so you might as well be on the leading edge of it.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question that we have coming up is how can we extend our sustainable values, principles, and policies towards guests coming into our space? For instance, large American franchises coming into theaters like Mirvish.
Ooh, it's a tough one. Yeah, I think maybe we touched a little bit on it, or Emma mentioned a little bit about it, but there's always a conversation that needs to happen between the presenter and the producer, and there has to be some buy-in where you can actually bring your show. So exactly what Matt's been saying the whole time, how do we put that on the table? How do we, add our mandate of being eco-friendly on the table so that all of our potential shows coming in know what that is off the bat and can adjust.
Mm-hmm. I would liken that to a lot of the sort of workplace harassment policies that we've all sort of contributed over the past while. That designers that are coming in from maybe elsewhere in the world, or directors coming out from somewhere, we've just now said, if you're going to be working in our space, these are the rules that you need to follow by. And I think that sort of thing can extend in a similar way, that if you are going to come and produce in our space, these are the rules that you need to follow by sustainably as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think in time that will become, there'll be peer-to-peer learning. We're going to face some really knotty challenges together, but ultimately we've got to set down a green framework for being theatres, and ultimately support each other in stepping towards that kind of improvement. And it needs to be, we talk at Soul Pepper a lot about a call-in culture rather than a call-out culture. Like we should, we need to support each other to make changes. I don't think we get anywhere by kind of naming and shaming. I think it has to be about committing to work sector-wide, and sharing resources and sharing knowledge and making change together.
Yeah, and being in sort of a united front about against all that.
And I think the question is not specifically talking about patrons coming into the space, but for also that aspect of, demographic who's coming into your space. I think things like in your playbills, in your billing, to talk about sustainable, to offer incentives like at your cafe or at the bar, things like that can engage the community, that are fun ways to do that, to offer resources and things like that are super helpful to get the word out.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So we'll go on to our next question here. Has anyone experienced an example of how a sustainable choice has benefited the storytelling of their piece?
I think, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but aesthetically speaking, like for example, Peter Pan, which we've had the great benefit of touring all over Ontario. We've toured it to Winnipeg. It's been easier to tour. Like we haven't had a hassle of like, how are we going to get our set there? It's like our set fits into this trunk that is also a part of our set. And then there's like a bin for costumes. So it's helped us as a young company, expand our reach, make our work more sellable. And I think it's encouraged our audiences to imagine with us, which is something that I think is something that only theater can really do. Film can accomplish. It's really hard for film to ask their audience to imagine. We expect film to just show us. Theater, there's something very special about gathering people together and buying into a story together. And imagination is such a huge part of that. And that imagination goes hand in hand with sustainable choices. So it has deeply benefited our work in every aspect of it. Those sustainable choices helped us get our work farther, and I think has also deepened the impact of our audiences viewing our work and our relationship to our audiences. It's a symbiotic relationship. We need them to buy into the story, and they need us to tell the story, and that's done through. And because our shows are often for families, we have kids there, and kids have access to that imagination so easily. So even when you have a skeptical adult, if you have a kid who's willing to buy in, and that adult sees that can sometimes help them buy in as well.
I worked on a show a few years ago at Buddy's. For some reason, it was like a really popular trend in Toronto to have dirt in
Yeah.
and we're definitely part of this trend. And so because there was a lot of buzz about, is it feasible to bring in dirt, a huge mound of it, enough to like bury people in? Would you rather use maybe a rubber material or something that's like more plastic so that it heats? And ultimately, I think for this particular show, it didn't make sense to do that. It with the lighting and with the artistry of it, with the director as well, he was very adamant that this should be real, that you could feel and touch the dirt, and you would get the mess on your hands and on your costume. So yeah, after talking with the designer to see how feasible that would be, we actually realized that it was quite sustainable, that you would just have to go to a landscaping company, get it in, maintain it in a way that didn't destroy the dirt or pollute it, and then bring it back. And we ended up cost saving quite a bit than we would have for rubber mulch and then having to dispose of that.
Yeah, the good thing about using materials that come directly from nature is you could put them directly back into nature and plant a little garden outside your theater.
And then I'll just give it to Soul Pepper and they can make that garden.
Yeah. That's great. That's really nice to hear. Emma, do you have a point on that, or should we move on to the next one?
That's two great examples.
Great. So who or what is fueling your thinking around making more ecologically just choices? Who or what is your inspiration? So why are you making these decisions? Why are you choosing to be more sustainable in your practices in the theater?
I love Triga Creative. I know they're friends of CGA, so I'm sure lots of people know about them. But I think they really inspired me to start that conversation with the designer, or made me actually realize that sustainability can't come from one person. In theater, it has to come from producers, they have to buy into it, the company has to buy into it, and then the designers and the support people who are executing the project need to buy into it. So there's a lot of collaboration that happens there, and I think my most successful projects in sustainability were with designers who wanted to cooperate and collaborate.
Yeah, I think about this from a sort of storytelling perspective rather than sort of specifically about production, because I think that, clearly how we live and exist in the world has to change. And it already is changing, and it has to change a hell of a lot more very, very quickly. And I think that too often the discussion about the kind of change we're looking to make is very negatively framed. It's, you must fly less, buy less, do less. And it all starts to feel very depressing and overwhelming very quickly. And actually, what the arts can do and should do, and I believe will do, is articulate a future that's better and inspire people to a place where actually the changes we need to make are positive. And I think we're still figuring out how to do that, but I think ultimately that's our role in this debate, is alongside the science and the politics and the economics, is to show us a future that is better and more exciting and healthier, where we're more connected, all of the positive things, because that's ultimately what's going to make a difference. And I think in order to do that, as I said right at the start, we've got to get our own house in order, we've got to figure out the stories we're telling, and we've got to inspire the artist activist. So it's all a kind of harmonious effort. But ultimately, we've got to be the positive truth, and that's what will make a difference.
I love that. I have nothing to add to that. That was brilliant. I think you might be muted now. We didn't hear that.
Oh, so sorry. That was beautiful. I think I couldn't think of a better way to wrap up this episode than by what you just said. So I think that's excellent, and that would bring us to the end of this of CGA's second episode of the Green Panel series. I want to thank the Canadian Green Alliance for bringing us all together, the Seagull Center for sponsoring this episode, all of our panelists, Emma, Matt, Crystal, and everyone else for tuning in. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.